Welcome to Scandinavia House Online. I'm Emily Stoddard, Manager of Exhibitions and Community Programs at the American Scandinavian Foundation and Scandinavia House, and I'm delighted to introduce this virtual program, Down North, a conversation about the North Atlantic Triennial, produced in collaboration with the Portland Museum of Art. The North Atlantic Triennial is the result of an institutional partnership between the Portland Museum of Art, Maine, Reykjavik Art Museum in Iceland, and Bildmuseet in Sweden. The exhibition premiered at the Portland Museum of Art in February 2022 and will be on view through June 5th. The exhibition will travel to the Reykjavik Art Museum in October of 2022 and the Bildmuseet in June 2023. The North Atlantic Triennial presents 21st century art from an unprecedented cross-section of 30 artists living in Maine, the Canadian Maritimes, Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Faroe Islands, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, as well as Indigenous nations throughout the region. Climate and environmental changes and a difficult history of colonization of Indigenous peoples have generated new works of art that address a cascading series of social, economic, political, and ecological challenges throughout the region. The selected works in all media trace shared narratives in the field of contemporary art, reflecting novel affinities and chasms within societies and among nations in the North Atlantic. In tonight's program, the three curators behind the North Atlantic Triennial, Jaime DeSimone from the Portland Museum of Art, Markús Þór Andrésson from the Reykjavik Art Museum, and Anders Jansson from the Bildmuseet, join art writer Gregory Volk in a conversation about the structure and approach to curating the exhibition while expanding on the notion of turning the North upside down. Jaime DeSimone is the Robert and Elizabeth Nanovic Curator of Contemporary Art at the Portland Museum of Art, where she curated the exhibitions Ragnar Kjartansson, Scenes from Western Culture, Carrie Moyer and Sheila Pepe, Tabernacles for Trying Times, and Richard Estes, Urban Landscapes. She received grants from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the International Artist Studio Program in Stockholm, and Frame Finland, as well as a curatorial research fellowship from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, for research and travel in connection with the 2022 North Atlantic Triennial. DeSimone is also a current scholar in the Fulbright Arctic Initiative for 2021-2022. She served in other curatorial positions at MoCA Jacksonville and the Addison Gallery of American Art. She holds degrees in art history with a specialization in contemporary art from American University and Bates College. Markús Þór Andrésson has held the position of Chief Curator, Exhibitions and Public Engagement at Reykjavik Art Museum since 2017. Prior, he worked as an independent curator, writer, and filmmaker. He holds an MA from the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College. Previously, he was an undergraduate in studio arts at the Iceland Academy of the Arts. Anders Jansson is a curator and the Deputy Director at Bildmuseet, where he curated the exhibitions Architectures of Transition, Faith Ringgold Design Matters, and Animalesque Art Across Species and Beings. Before joining Bildmuseet in 2018, he was the director of Skellefteå Museum from 2016 to 2018, and prior to that, head of the art department at Museum Anna Nordlander, Skellefteå. As an editor and writer, he has contributed to publications such as Entangle, Physics and the Artistic Imagination, and Angela Ferreira Pan-African Unity Mural. He holds degrees in curating from Stockholm University and art history from Umeå University. Gregory Volk is a New York-based art writer, freelance curator, and former associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. He writes regularly for Hyperallergic, and his articles and reviews have also appeared in many other publications, including Art in America and the Brooklyn Rail. He has written numerous texts on Icelandic artists through the years, and his book-length essay on innovative German artist Katharina Grosse appears in the monograph Katharina Grosse. A graduate of Colgate University and Columbia University, Volk has curated many exhibitions in the US and abroad.
So I'll jump in. Thank you for all joining us. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about the genesis of what we now know as the North Atlantic Triennial. The first iteration of this project is titled Down North, and it is, of course, translated in both Icelandic and Swedish, that I will let my partners here on screen share their traditions. And we thought about this project many years ago, and the Portland Museum of Art, where I'm a curator at, thought, what would it look like to create a collaborative exhibition that surveyed a geographical area that has a history of connections as countries over water, over commerce, over fishing, various industries, and how would we build a cultural collaboration in the present day. And so that was as far as the idea got, and we were thinking about what we would frame the North Atlantic and Nordic region, starting in the state of Maine, which of course is a gateway, the United States gateway to the Nordic and the Arctic, and reaching across all the way over to Iceland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Greenland. And that is when we at Portland Museum of Art approached colleagues at the Reykjavík Art Museum and the Bildmuseet about this potential partnership and what it might look like, how it could grow, how it would travel. And so it was a very nascent idea that then through a lot of collaboration and conversation, studio visits in person, of course, before the pandemic hit, and then a lot of Zoom meetings following throughout 2020 and even 2021. The project was postponed a year because of the pandemic. So we are thrilled that it is currently on the Museum of Art in right now, before it will travel to Iceland in the fall and then Sweden in 2023. So that is a very quick introduction. Markús or Anders, I don't know if you want to share anything about your viewpoints on how it came to be.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Markús here from the Reykjavík Art Museum. Thanks for joining. It's great to get this thing going, to see the show up in Portland, because we've been waiting for such a long time for it to be realized. And accompanied here are some images from the installation at the Portland Museum of Art. The exhibition will travel almost identically over to Iceland, but we'll also have some additions and changes to the show as it goes, and in particular to the programming, because the programming part of the exhibition, we couldn't really bring it into fruition in Portland because of the pandemic, but we're hoping for things to be a little lighter in Reykjavik in the fall. So performances and talks and public programming is hopefully going to be active when we're in Reykjavik. We were very happy that the Portland Museum of Art requested or came up with this idea to collaborate, because Iceland is of course positioned in the middle of the East and the West, in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. So we've always been a gateway between the two continents, Europe and North America. And for us to collaborate in a project that focuses on the northern parts of the hemisphere, the Arctic and the North Atlantic regions, is sort of natural for us. So we welcome the idea to be part of the satellites for the exhibition. And we collaborated in a way that we sort of brought to the table the art scenes of our respective backgrounds, Maine and Iceland and the northern part of Sweden. And from those backgrounds, we sort of selected or presented to each other a range of artists that we were interested in. And I guess it was sort of through those artists that we started to realize certain thematics and approaches and ideas that we wanted to follow further, and that we did with the following interviews and studio visits. So we sort of took our mutual backgrounds as a starting point, and from there we created the exhibition. I guess that's a very general way to describe the way we created it. Anders.
Yes, Anders Jansson here from Bildmuseet in Umeå. which is in the north of Sweden. For us, the same as Marcus said, we were really happy to be approached by the Portland Museum of Art to partner up in this collaboration. And for us, I think it really hit home in this kind of thematics or just the investigation about the North and what is going on in this kind of hemisphere. Geographically, we don't have the same kind of position as Iceland. It was something that came up early in conversations that, we're not really close to the Atlantic, more of the Baltic Sea, but the sense of the North and the perhaps image of the North is something that has been part of our identity or research as an art institution, being quite far from the obvious artistic centers in Stockholm or in Berlin or London and everything. We have been inquiring these kind of questions regarding center versus periphery, and what constitutes these kind of things. And it was this collaboration or this project was also a way for us to continue that investigation, or perhaps just reshaping the nature of things in order to create new centers, and looking more into these kind of east-west directions, just following the natural line in Sweden, which is always, the north is looking down to the south to see what's going on, to be up to date, so to say. And that is also something that, transfer into the title, these kind of discussions, to down north, to turn things on its head or shift the perspectives, turn this map upside down, more or less, and do a new kind of navigation. So it will be really interesting. It's lovely to see the show up in Portland, but it's also very exciting in this kind of prospect of seeing the continuation of the collaboration. As Marcus said, things will probably change, things will happen, and things will evolve, I would say. So in some ways, the opening of the actual exhibition is just a starting point for a second phase of this collaboration.
Yeah, Anders, thank you for saying that. And Marcus, you as well, because I think between the three of us, when we talk about this project, we talk about the lifespan of planning it, but then also of it being on view and traveling. And, the opening in Portland kind of marked that beginning, which is a year and a half then program of opportunities for engagement and outreach and really reaching the audiences where these artists are living and being, both through in-person events and digital events. And because when the show opened in February in Portland, we were still under strict protocol related to COVID-19. We were not having any in-person events. Slowly, that seems to be lifting. So it looks like there might be a couple of events planned towards the very end of the exhibition, which is very exciting, and to bring people together. But we at the Portland Museum of Art were delighted that the Reykjavik Art Museum and the Bildmuseet kind of answered our call to participate in this exhibition. I was quite struck by the contemporary art programs at both of these institutions and how ambitious they are. This is the first international project that the Portland Museum of Art has spearheaded in collaboration with these two other organizations. So it is a real milestone in our contemporary art program. And for us, one of the exhibition goals was to create these strategic partnerships. And we're always looking to find ways to promote and increase visibility for what we consider Maine-based artists who are part of the museum's commitment, and not only our collection and holdings, but also our exhibition program. So this is just the additional ways we are in service to those artists. And so giving them this type of exposure and platform. And I think through the exhibition and the thematic essays, you start to understand shared values, parallels, consistencies in the way these artists are working and thinking about the North. Some of them, but when I mean them, some of the works are directly related to urgencies in the North, such as climate change, Indigenous rights and politics, while others, are just examples of some of the most cutting edge artists' work today. Of course, as a curatorial team, we had the impossible task to narrow down quite a lengthy list of potential artists to 30. And our goal was to have a range of media, have a range of styles, have a range of themes, and of course, offer what we hope would be a dynamic section to audiences in each of our neighborhoods, where people would find recognizable names, but surprises as well, since, as when we would joke about what it means to be international, and I think of Anders as Marcus and international, and they think of the US as international. So this exchange, and so I'm very pleased when, the mother of the Maine-based artist might be seen in each one of their cities, and they're considered and celebrated as being artists on an international sphere. So that's very exciting.
First of all, congratulations to all of you. I think it's really wonderful, and the show looks great and provocative and compelling. I'm totally interested in what is your shift in orientation from countries to a region, to the North. And it seems to me that a fundamental aspect of that some of you address, that you all in some ways address in your essays, is really the fraught, problematic, important relationship between nature and humans in this turning time, in this difficult time. So could you talk a little bit about that, how this exhibition is addressing not just issues of climate change, but our human relationship with nature in the climate of the North?
Yes, Gregory, what you're saying is absolutely right. There is a huge topic, man and nature, or nature and man, or man with nature, man in nature, man as part of nature, around these northern parts. And many of the artists we're working with are addressing those issues in quite a remarkable way. And we do have sort of a section in the exhibition which deals with this relationship, man and environment, but also we are looking at works that have to do with man and living nature, with animals and flora and fauna. So we have these very broad relationships that we are addressing. If we take only man and environment, which would be climate and air and ocean, glaciers, this is a huge topic for these artists. And what we observed in our research is that many of the artists who are addressing those issues are doing it in a very individual way. They go out into the field on their own, and they experience things with their own hands, with their own eyes, with their own bodies, and they interpret those experiences in their work. And we found that was a very, very important lesson to learn, the difference in the way in which artists approach nature through their experiences. They go out on a limb to document things, to find things, to try out cliches that have been handed down to them on their own skin, and to follow in the footsteps of others and tell a different story, because they're doing it as individuals with different experiences, different knowledge, different hopes and dreams and whatnot, and everything comes together in very personal narratives. That's at least what comes through many of the works that are dealing with man and nature.
Yeah, and Gregory, I really liked how you started your question, because I think for me, kind of part of the exhibition brand is this circular map with the North Pole centered and centering, what we might consider the circumpolar North area where the artists from this North Atlantic region live and work. And that was also like a shift in perspective that we wanted to make very clear, flipping the way that we understand maps and understand place. And of course, knowing that a lot of the indigenous peoples who have been inhabiting this land for thousands of years were borderless peoples. So these types of like geopolitics that go into these boundaries that we now understand, what happens when you strip them away? What happens when you think about just really the root of the artists and the people living and working there? This work by Lauren Fensterstock is an incredible example of the ways in which we pretend to be able to control nature and collect nature. But of course, the irony is humans are not in control at all. And we see these overgrowth in these cabinets of curiosities, which are a monolithic, complete blackness, kind of stripping the identity of nature out. But it asks so many questions. And I think, speaking on behalf of the curators, it would be okay to say that, a lot of these works pose questions without straight answers. They are provocative and thought-provoking in that way, and that felt really exciting to us as well.
I think that something that, even though we sort of single out these three very broad themes, which to me is very much about different kinds of relationships, how we interact or relate to nature or each other as human beings, is sort of like also the interspecies relationships or connections. But I think what we really discovered quite early on in these virtual studio visits that we started having during the pandemic is this, how the individual stories being told by these artists somehow mirrored each other. It wasn't the same story in the Canadian Maritimes or in Maine that it was in the north of Norway or in Iceland or anything, but it was similar, and it was sort of like part of a bigger history or story, which it's really that was something that I found really intriguing or really exciting in a way, making this vast project also more familiar or smaller. So I think each artist carry their own individual experience and all these kind of regions within regions have their unique histories, but they're still part of a more common thing, which is really fascinating to just tap into in these kind of works and see how they relate to each other. I think that was something that when me and Markús arrived for the opening in Portland in February, it was something that also took us a little bit by surprise, seeing how these how the artworks started interacting with each other in ways that we haven't perhaps expected or seen beforehand. But it was a really exciting and a little bit curious experience being part of that.
Let me try something else. It's really great hearing all of you, but I just like two questions. Maybe you can address them. The first is, if you could talk a little bit more about what was just being expressed, like the surprise of seeing the show and the interaction, and how the works interact with one another, and how the exhibition will change when going to Iceland and Sweden. Is that part of your process, like a flexible exhibition that will take on a different incarnations? That's point one and then my point two question. All of it, it's like not all of it, but it's striking to me how relevant this exhibition is, or these exhibitions will be exactly at this time of crisis, of the pandemic, global warming, and now the war in Ukraine. We're having to do with geopolitical borders and basically warfare. You're making a transnational exhibition in a region that in many ways the artists are really addressing all of these most important questions, our relationship to Earth, to nature, to flora and fauna, to glaciers, climate crisis, and also the importance of, as Jamie was saying, of a border crossing transnational mentality. Okay, that's it right now.
No, I think if the gentlemen don't mind, I will say that we agreed early on that each of us knows our galleries best. So we would defer to the hosting curator to install the exhibition. So I had that wonderful responsibility at the Portland Museum of Art. We do this great planning through Google SketchUp. So I was able to share with them, CAD drawings of the layout. Of course, things always change on the floor. And as probably the first person who saw the art objects being unpacked, a lot of these works we hadn't seen in person because we hit a point in the planning process where we had to go completely digital and studio visits were online. So it was this moment of wonder and awe and just pure joy in slowing down to look at the objects, firsthand as they're first going up on the walls. And then as more objects went up and more objects went up, there is a story to be told here about all of the things you just shared. And I think it's all of our lived experiences that help maybe draw and build and expand upon whichever one of those themes might be most relevant for the viewer to kind of engage with the object. But I have no idea how our installation in Portland might inform my peers' installation. So I'm very excited to see what they might do.
In terms of the show traveling, it's definitely going to change because, like Jamie is saying, that many of the works are just brand new. We commissioned quite a lot of new works for the show, new videos, new installations that we were seeing for the first time in the Portland galleries. And looking at Peter Serrano's wall installation, which is based on his experience in Greenland, where he was staying for a few weeks, just researching the movement of icebergs in the ocean. He takes this information into the wall drawing and interprets the movement of the glacier and the melting of the glacier in the wall drawing. He will have to reiterate this installation in our different locations. So the show will look and feel quite different from one place to the other. But what will also come out is that through the different installations, we're going to see different conversations between the pieces. So things will start jumping out at just the colors that scream out at you, like Arden Gunnar's paintings together with Superflex's sculpture that you installed so nicely together, Jamie, in the same gallery. They just have a very interesting conversation just through the initial look. And then when you get into the ideology behind the work, there is similarities there. It's about fantasy, it's about playfulness. And that's what I love about many of the works in the show, because we are, of course, in a state of crisis in the world in terms of climate change and war and pandemic and whatnot. But if not artists, then who can teach us that play and humor and the fantasy is so important, and not least in matters of important urgencies. In matters that we can so easily just hit a wall thinking about them and just not giving a damn because they're too complex or too traumatic. But artists have always a way to look forward through play, through fun, through interaction, through surprising us and surprising themselves. And I think that's a very, very important statement that we have visible in many of the works in the show, and comes forward through these installation processes of bringing 2, 3, 4 different works together and highlighting these playful issues at stake.
Mm-hmm.
I also would like to add in that I think that, you know, even though we will keep the, you know, we have the lead in the installation of our own institutions, as Jaime said, you know, it's quite different venues, we know each other's, you know, our own museums the best in the locations and everything. But I think it is also in the keeping up with that kind of conversation and that collaboratory spirit that's, you know, been part of this project from the start. I think will be quite important, because it's a way also just to, you know, I think our vision, or what we hope at least, that you know, the exhibition or just the collaboration will continue to live on in Portland, even though, you know, the show has traveled and it's, you know, we're being shown in Umeå next year. Just by through these kind of things of different kinds of pairings. So, you know, earlier, you know, we saw one of the new commissions, which is this sculptural installation by Swedish artist Jansson, Londré, who deals a lot with psychoanalysts and you know, if we as humans can inherit trauma and experiences and so, which is this kind of was in Jaime's pairing, because it becomes so even more powerful to me, as is, you know, seeing it in pair with Julie Edel Hardenberg's Danish flag there with the black strands of hair, also talking about trauma and the history of you know, colonization and the heritage that comes from that, and just putting it in a different kind of setting. You know, perhaps it won't be possible to pair it in Iceland in the same way. So a new conversation will spark something new in each work, I think. So in that sense, the exhibition will continue to evolve, and of course, different kinds of programming as well. And I think that's a very unique aspect of this whole project, being this true collaboration. You know, even though I take the lead in installing it in Umeå, I think, you know, one of my closest collaborators will be Jaime and Markús in having that kind of conversation about the show when it comes to Sweden. So again, it's you know, it's a big journey that's somewhat just starting in some ways.
One thing I've noticed through all my years as an art writer is that visual art tends to be visual. And I think what I'm seeing from these images is this is an exhibition for all its driving ideas, urgencies, theoretical points, political matters. It really revels in the visual power of artworks, and in what Jane Bennett in her great book Vibrant Matter has called thing power. That objects and images really have power, and like this visual pleasure and seduction and a compelling visuality seems really important here.
I think you're absolutely right, Gregory, that all of us, the three of us, we share this interest in the visuality and the materiality of the art that we're dealing with. The power of the image, the power of the material, or the craftsmanship behind it is super important to us. And for this to speak to the audiences in the way that it's meant to is very important. And that's not to say that many of the works have very interesting background stories. There is research processes, and there is time, and there is a lot of things that you can delve into theoretically or otherwise. I mean, there is works that's dealing with very complex social issues that have to do with regional or very local histories that you might not necessarily know but still the impact of the work speaks to you here and now, and that's what we were aiming for, that the show would bring together works that that affects or has its effect on you as a viewer here and now, because that's also facilitating this idea behind the show, that we're bringing together works from such different backgrounds. From, you know, we're trying to create a story with one region that crosses borders and has a story to tell that connects rather than divides. So using this visual and physical power of the work was very important to us. I'm glad you note that, Gregory.
Yeah, I would say it's very heartwarming to hear that reaction from you, because I think this might be a little biased in that way of, you know, as the once you selected the objects and the artists, but you know, after the show went up and after we started to see people in the galleries and get some responses on the ground in Maine, you know, I kept asking myself, like, okay, did we do a good job? Like, are the key takeaways being met? How are people engaging? And of course, you know, there's a lot of interpretation in the galleries, to the point that you both are making, because this is the first introduction to a lot of the artists' work for our audiences. So that was an important interpretive element that we wanted to make sure we were giving enough information, but also opportunities for someone to inform their own opinion. That was kind of a part of the planning process before the show opened. And also, I think, you know, in the tradition of biennial and triennials, you know, is that strength a product of focusing in on a geographic area that has long been romanticized as this like far off place where there's all these mythologies swirling around its people and histories? I like to think yes. I like to think that we're flipping the script, which is part of the reason, you know, the project is called Down North, to really disrupt some of those preconceived notions of what art of this region is.
In connection with that, Jamie is saying is it, I think, you know, something that I agree with, but it's also a way of trying to, you know, try to explore or tweak the concept of the triennial or the biennial, you know, which more on the surface could be about, you know, this location where you bring all the biggest artists, or yes, there are a lot of artists and a lot of curators, and collect them and sort of like display them or work on a site. But it's also a way of you know, actually trying to work with some kind of you know, actual cultural exchange. So, you know, I'm quite curious and hopeful to see, you know, what else comes out of this kind of collaboration. You know, how can this collaboration help to create other kinds of networks, which perhaps we as institutions are not part of? You know, is there a way of strengthening the relationship between artist-run galleries in the north of Scandinavia with galleries in Iceland or in Maine or in Canada even, and having these kind of processes evolve on their own, making sure, you know, it is a process that keeps on living, even though the exhibition has been packed and shipped back to the artists in a couple of years. So it is a lot about tweaking and disrupting, just not only the notion of the North, but also I think in a way of, you know, just the way we are working, because this way of working and collaborating, you will have to correct me if I'm wrong, was new to all of us. And it definitely was to us at Bildmuseet. So it's quite interesting in that sense.
I just really like congratulate all of you for exactly what Anders just said. Like this way of working, like as individuals, but also as representatives of institutions, was new to all of you. This kind of collaboration And I think that's just great that you did that. I think that this show would be very hard to realize in different places. For example, Stockholm or New York City. I think that's very unlikely. And you're like thinking in a very creative way as curators, in my opinion. And I think it's really excellent and kind of a visionary way of approaching things here. Do you agree, Anders?
Yes.
Like, for example,
no, well, thank you for saying that. You know, but
for example, Havramagasinet in Boden is a very different place than Stockholm.
Oh yeah.
And Portland, Maine is a very different cultural place than New York City or Los Angeles. And that's and then Iceland is wonderful, and Iceland is Iceland. That's a strength for this show, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly, you know, we collaborated, you know, and we do so in many ways with museums all over the world, and many of them we have very, you know, they are great collaborations, but it's hard for me to picture us doing what we have done with down north. Yes, from that case, you know, working with museums in Stockholm or Tate Modern or anything like that. Because in many ways it's, and I think that perhaps was something that was sort of like underestimated, but it was also a big part of this process that also took a lot of time, was just to build this kind of relationship and get to know each other's institution and the context that we function within, in order to also build the trust, because there, you know, it's depending on a lot of trust. Because in that sense, it was a leap for all of us, which, you know, seeing where we are now, it was, you know, I'm very proud that we did it and had the guts to do it. But it is a quite novel way of working.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if I could just add and share, you know, I showed up at the Bildmuseet with 24 hours notice back in 2019 to meet Anders and their director, because I was in Stockholm making visits and pitches about the exhibition and thinking who might be a collaborative partner. And everyone kept being like, go to the Bildmuseet, go to the Bildmuseet. They are the partner here, because of the work that they were doing. And so when I showed up, you know, of course, I was enamored immediately with the building and their exhibition program and the gallery. But then just through very candid conversations, I made it very clear that there were no, you know, concrete plans for what this project could be. It would be for the curatorial team to grow into it and determine and define that along the way. And I think this is the only reason I'm grateful for the pandemic, is that I think the exhibition is much better as a result of the year of planning, because it actually allowed, through digital Zoom studio visits, for the three of us to be present in every conversation with every potential artist. And so there were no egos on the curatorial side. There was a mutual respect. And we were all listening and seeing and experiencing conversations with artists to inform a shared direction for the project, which like you said, I don't think it could work with every partnership in the way that we were able to do it.
I have like along these lines, but it's a little like a naive question, but I want to ask it anyway. Could, if you wouldn't mind, could you, each of you mention something that, say, was like particularly thrilling for you, that came out, unexpected and thrilling, that came out of this, like especially in terms of artists and artworks that you would not have known before your collaboration with each other as curators? Like, what really rocked your world that you didn't know about before, that's now in the show?
There's a lot of things that come to mind, you know, that sort of stand out as something, you know, surprising or positively, you know, something that came sort of out of the blue. I guess I could name just one example that it's a surprise to me that we managed to do a show on the with this title North Atlantic Triennial, and we sort of tried to take down or reintroduce new cliches, take down old cliches and reintroduce new ones. I think that's a very positive outcome of this project, that we could do a show that's all about glaciers and nature and northern societies, and still there's a lot of elements that are very odd in this context, and I think that's a very positive experience to see how the body is interpreted, how we see like in two paintings we have two paintings of black female bodies entering a bathtub, juxtaposed with very conceptual arches that remind us of the arches of your backbones. We have very interesting juxtapositions between the actual visible physical body and the idea of the body, the history of the body, and we have through these works a very versatile society that we are representing. It's a society that's gone through a lot of changes. There's migration, there is unusual meeting points between history and new history. I think maybe those elements, to see how versatile the North really is, I think that's a very pleasant surprise to me, that we could, we had hoped for it to happen, and it happened very naturally. I have to say that the communities here in the North, they're so rich and they're so versatile.
No, I think it's just overall, it's just this. I think there are a lot of examples of just you getting these kind of wow moments, and I think it's a lot of them just came to. I mean, if we're being perfectly honest, this is kind of like Maine was new to me. I've never been to Maine before, and it was also just this getting to know just the people, but also a lot of the artists, and coming back and just dwelling into these kind of like this whole region was very much an eye-opener, because a lot of these artists that we have talked to or visited in their studios, even though it was on Zoom, were new to me, and they were introduced to me by Jaime or Markús, or we had our contacts, scanning the area, because I don't know all the Swedish artists even in Sweden, which was that kind of conversations is something that will carry with me for a long time, and there's many artists also that it's not part of the show that still remains back in the head, because it's I think it is very true what Markús is saying, is that is just getting this understanding of the richness and everything that's going on in this region. It will keep you occupied for years to come if you want to.
I think my surprise, which isn't really a surprise, but I guess more of, if I had to say, I'm not sure what the right word is at the moment, but over the course of the 4 or 5 years of planning, we would attend the Arctic Circle Assembly Conference in Reykjavik every fall, and they're very scientific-based, political, policy-driven conversations. And the very first year that I went, there was one panel related to the arts. It was and had to do with these collaborations between artists and scientists who were going on expeditions together and producing new kind of data or ways of understanding data and making it accessible. And I think as the three of us continue to do our visits with artists and get to know them, what becomes apparent, at least to us, and if people kind of really dive into the material, is that there's a lot of behind the scenes research being taken place by these artists. For instance, these prints by Anna are the course of 26 years of expeditions on glaciers, tracking and studying and reinterpreting her experience with them. And so it's not straightforward. They're not scientific necessarily. They're making these ideas about melting perhaps more complex. But the surprise and the delight, I would say, is there are many of the artists in the show, those that are not, who are so open to interdisciplinary conversation and output, that I think this is the direction that a lot of these conversations will be taking and need to be taking to, you know, build a better place for our future. And I'm so kind of smitten by the idea that art and artists are leading the way through their work.
That's great. I have to ask one thing. I don't mean to talk too much. Is it okay?
That's it.
Yeah, you're great.
Of course.
So, Jamie, but this is also for all of you. Yes, Maine is indeed wonderful, and I've been backpacking in Baxter State Park, the northern part of this vast, remarkable place where not that many people go, and it's all wonderful, and it's also Native American territory for millennia. That is like really ignored in American culture, and I think it's really great that it's not ignored, not just Baxter State Park, but Maine in your exhibition. And also I've been in Norrbotten in the north of Sweden and Sami territory, and I think this is really great how a culture that has been there for millennia also is appearing in your exhibition. That's like just my observations.
Yeah, I think we were, really thriving to be reflective of the communities, this geographic area, kind of set the parameters for us, and what does that mean to be inclusive, and thinking across time and histories, and people have very long memories, and honoring the people who have been inhabiting these lands from the very beginning. And so if you were to do a cross section and be really analytical about it, I think almost a third of the show represents Indigenous peoples.
That's fantastic.
Which was, really important to us. And they all present different personal and universal conversations that help us understand the way our communities, both in Maine and the Canadian Maritimes and across the way, have continued to mistreat these people, deal with colonization and decolonization, ongoing rights in the Sami land about reindeer herding and forestry. These are all very relevant topics. I mean, this is the year where the Nordic Pavilion is turned over to the Sami Pavilion. Like, this is a very important moment for those artists. And I think we're so grateful that, they wanted to participate in our small group show when they're, on the true platform of contemporary art this year.
Yeah, I think that was something we talked about quite early on, because when you're working with the thematics of the North, or perhaps even the Arctic, or coming down to the Nordic, what's happening in Sweden and everything, you can't really discuss the creation of the contemporary North without addressing the colonization of Sapmi, or even though also in the United States. So I think that was something which we talked a lot about, and it's now we're seeing this work by Anders Sunna, which is to me a little bit of sort of like a new turn for him, but it's we're delighted that he was that he accepted to do a new commission, so make this, work specifically for the show. And many others, Katarina Piirac-Sikku, Megan Musso, and all of these artists that are participating.
Do you think it might be possible, like if the pandemic declines or becomes even more manageable, for artists for select artists to travel to the next two incarnations of the exhibition in Reykjavik and Umeå?
We certainly hope for that to happen. We are already in the process of preparing the opening for Iceland in October. So we're in contact with some of the artists who are definitely coming, and we're hoping for many of them to come just to be part of the public programming, to be able to have their own tours around the show, to have talks or take part in any sorts of public programming in person, creating live performances and such. So we really hope that as many as possible can travel, and being a show that spans this region, we had quite some positive reaction from funding bodies such as the Nordic Culture Point and the Nordic Culture Fund, who are very invested in ideas of community and networking. So we are certainly going to try our best in making that happen, for this show to become a network for the artists who are participating, for them to be able to meet each other and communicate, because that's just the situation has been like that we haven't been able to do it thus far, but we certainly hope for that to happen in the later iterations of the show.
And I think the ones who at least were able to attend the opening in Portland and are in the process of doing some digital programs, they're all really fascinated with each other's work. And so of course they want to meet each other. And I think Iceland is the moment we're all targeting for that to happen and everyone to attend the opening. But I think of them as kind of, even though the project is only just beginning, the goal is that we will embark on a triennial format, and the North Atlantic Triennial will occur again in 2025. And so they're the alumni of the first iteration. So what does that look like when the project comes through like a 3 cycle, and we then, from a real bird's eye view, look at possibly 90 artists who have been working across a 9-year span, and to see where the conversations and directions go. I can't wait for that moment to get here, and we're only just at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great.
Thank you.
There's one other thing I've got to ask this. Like it's really excellent what you've done. You've been planning this, you're realizing it. But one thing none of you as curators could have possibly anticipated is that the North would be subject to like yet another crisis, which is Russia. And I mean, that's a real wild card thing, and that must be really like quite something to be in Finland or Sweden now, just dealing with basically like 1939 comes to 2022 with a dictatorship that is profoundly threatening. So I just wonder how you all feel about that, since your show is so like, it's so excellently focused on the North, but the North is now beleaguered.
Yeah. Well, ironically, when we were first like defining the boundaries of the project, we talked about Russia and Alaska, and should they be included in the framework. And I think we, clearly came to the agreement that in this first iteration, they would not be. But I've thought a lot about, well, what would that have then looked like and felt like if we had had Russian artists participating, and what position might we take at that point? you can't necessarily answer those questions. But of course, right now, I'm based in Tromsø, Norway, and I have colleagues here who have been going back and forth to Helsinki and the Russian border for various projects and residencies. And, even being in this vicinity of the war, there's a complete also kind of amnesia to it in many ways, because it is out of sight unless you're heavily dialed into the media. So yeah, I think maybe one way to think about your question is that because there's not necessarily imagery or ideas about warfare in any of the artist's works, like perhaps the show is continuing to romanticize the North and gloss over some of the complicated histories.
That's possible, but I think it would have been impossible as curators to think that the eastern Finnish border and Sweden could be threatened by a murderous dictator from Russia. I mean, I think that would have been like hard to predict. But I mean, it's interesting, but that is the case right now. So
yeah.
I mean,
And we know
and Ukrainian refugees. I mean, I was recently in Iceland, right? When Ukrainian refugees started to come to Iceland, which is great. But I'm sure that that's going to be the case throughout the North.
Oh yeah.
No, what I was thinking is that I think obviously you're right, Gregory. We could never have foreseen this or anticipated this particular event or this line of events. But what I think is important to look at in those terms is how many works and stories tell a story that can easily be transferred into what's happening elsewhere. I mean, just the way in which people think of their land and there's colonial histories that are being dealt with in the exhibition, property of land, use of land, who gets to say what, who gets to stay where. All these questions are deeply political, and when worst comes to worst, things explode in the way they're doing now in front of our eyes, which is terrible. But that's why I think it's so immensely important to look at those histories, these little individual stories that are being told, to acknowledge them, to bring them forward, to respect the histories, and to also to address certain arguments or certain quarrels that are going on, and dealing with them in maybe more creative ways than jumping to war immediately. I mean, this is of course preposterous. That's what's happening right now. But artists are trying to deal with these delicate, profoundly political matters in a way that's maybe eye-opening in terms of you can see ways forward that you might not possibly do within political dialogue or within other kinds of negotiations.
And I was thinking that, in some ways this sounds perhaps naive and everything, but it's one of the strengths of doing this project is seeing, how close or how small, perhaps you could say, this region really is. And we're talking a little bit about how the histories and the stories are mirroring each other, but even the kind of really, really personal projects like Mattias Olofsson's project about his tiny village, which me and Jamie visited, so like 30 houses perhaps. Mm-hmm. And it is his very much personal story. And everybody I met in Maine thought it was taking photographs. He had traveled to Maine to do it, because they sort of like they recognize it. It's like, yeah, I thought it was Maine. But so it's like his story became their story, and I think that's I think it's really beautiful. But it's all these kind of but also you see how fragile these kind of things are. You know, as you say, nobody expected, you know, what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine at the moment. You know, who had imagined that a year ago? And it's a tragedy what's happening over there, and I think there are, you know, many good things to take with us, and especially, you know, when we're meeting refugees from Ukraine, but also, you know, when it comes to artists from Russia, who's looking for places where they are free to express their opinion through their art, and I think all over the North we can play a really important role in that.
Great. Okay, I think I don't have any more questions.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Total congratulations for all of you. I think you've done something really wonderful and important and creative, and really that's excellent. And so nice meeting you.
Thank you so much.